No way. How do you confuse 28 days with 28 days later?
I'm not going to lie to you guys. When I first walked out of 28 years later, I hated it.
Garbage.
And judging by the early reactions, I wasn't alone.
This is awful.
It felt uneven, uncomfortable, and wrong. I was convinced this was just another classic case of Hollywood resurrecting a beloved IP just to parade its corpse around for a quick cash grab. I was ready to come home, call it content, and throw it on the pile with the rest of the cinematic slop we've been fed lately. But then something annoying happened.
No way.
Unlike the recent Marvel garbage that evaporates from your brain the second you leave the theater, this movie lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that this film was doing something intentional that I missed because I was too busy expecting it to be something else.
Oh, what'd you expect?
So, being the obsessive maniac that I am, I went back.
You're a maniac.
I dug deep, comparing it to the masterpiece that is 28 Days Later, looking not just at what the movie showed us, but why.
I need to understand.
And somewhere along the way, my perception flipped. What initially felt messy started to feel deliberate. Choices I dismissed as bad writing started to look like part of a much larger idea.
This is so much bigger than you think.
It's not a movie trying to keep your TikTok brain engaged with cheap jump scares. It wants to unsettle you. It wants to force you to sit with uncomfortable ideas about the lies we tell ourselves just to survive.
It's all a lie.
And nowhere is that clearer than in the film's ending. But to understand why the finale changes everything, we need to start at the beginning. To really understand why 28 years later feels so jarring and why so many people are currently losing their minds over it on Twitter, I have to take a step back and look at what this franchise actually is, because unlike the factory-lined productions we get from the MCU or the endless regurgitation of Star Wars, the 28 series has never really known how to sit still. It's a franchise that refuses to be just one thing. Most horror franchises find a formula that prints money, and then they beat it into the ground until it's unrecognizable. Halloween, Friday the 13th, Saw, you know the drill. You show up, you get the kills, you go home. But the 28 saga is basically an anthology of different anxieties held together by a simple, terrifying thread: the rage virus. I think the rage virus is one of the best zombie concepts ever put to film. I don't care what the purists say. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't hell running out of room. It was us. It was a man-made mistake, a scientific attempt to inhibit aggression that backfired so spectacularly, it turned the population into adrenaline-fueled murder machines. It grounded the horror in something that felt disturbingly plausible. But the way this concept has been used is where things get interesting. When 28 Days Later dropped in 2002, it was so fresh. I rewatched it recently just for this video, and it's shocking how well it holds up. Not a blockbuster, but an intimate movie. It was shot on those grainy, cheap Canon XL1 digital cameras that made everything look like a snuff film or a news broadcast from hell. It felt real. Forget about saving the world. This story was about Jim, Selena, and Hannah just trying to survive the next 10 minutes. Story about the death of the UK? Sure, but it was really a story about whether you can still find a reason to love someone when the world has gone to shit. It was quiet, it was sad, and it was beautiful. Then came 28 Weeks Later. I could call the first movie an indie folk song about the apocalypse, and 28 Weeks would be a heavy metal cover of it. The Americans showed up, the budget exploded, and the tone shifted from intimate survival to a military thriller. It became a critique of the green zone mentality, showing us exactly what happens when institutions, specifically the military, try to control chaos with brute force. Louder, meaner, and way more cynical. We went from the hope of Jim and Selena running through the fields to the absolute nightmare of Robert Carlyle abandoning his wife to save his own skin. A different beast entirely. And for a long time, that was it. We spent nearly 2 decades waiting for 28 months later, assuming we get another action-heavy sequel. We thought we knew the trajectory. But Danny Boyle and Alex Garland didn't wait 28 years just to give us another zombie movie with better CGI. 28 years later landed, and we all have found that it isn't a survival horror as the first part. It's not a military thriller like the second. It's barely even a zombie movie. It's a biblical epic, a folk horror. It's a movie that looks at the post-apocalypse and asks, what happens when the monsters become part of the landscape? The scope here is massive. There's no more dealing with the initial panic of the outbreak. Now we observe a world that has been broken for almost 3 decades. Society has regressed, returned to medieval thinking, to feudalism, to myth-making. The infected are a fact of life, like bad weather or a plague of locusts. This shift in genre is what's throwing people off. We're so used to franchises staying in their lanes. If I go to see a Fast and Furious movie, I know I'm getting cars and family. If I go to see a 28 movie, I expect running zombies and shaky cam. But 28 years later refuses to give you that comfort. It trades the adrenaline of the first 2 films for something slower, heavier, and infinitely more disturbing. But here's the thing, and this is key to understanding the movie. Despite the genre hopping, the core DNA is still there. If you strip away the folk horror aesthetic and the biblical references, the central thesis of the franchise hasn't changed a bit. The infected are dangerous, sure, they are a force of nature, but the true horror, the thing that actually makes my skin crawl, is always what people are willing to do to each other in the name of survival. The movie stops asking, how do we survive the infected, and starts asking, what kind of monsters do we have to become to make sure the infected don't matter anymore? We enter this new weird world through the eyes of Spike. Spike is a 12-year-old boy living on Lindisfarne, the Holy Island. It's a tidal island, cut off from the mainland twice a day by the ocean. It is the perfect metaphor for this community. Beautiful, isolated, and completely trapped by its own design, which we will discuss more later. Now, usually when we get a kid in the apocalypse character, Hollywood tends to go one of 2 ways. Option A, the kid is an annoying burden who makes stupid decisions just to move the plot forward. Or option B, the kid is a chosen one, a badass in training who can headshot a zombie from 50 yards away while cracking a Joss Whedon style quip. Spike is neither of those things, and thank God for that. Spike is a blank slate. He is a child of the post-apocalypse, meaning he has no memory of Starbucks or the internet, or a world where you didn't have to worry about your neighbors eating your face. His entire reality has been shaped by the stories told by him by the adults on this island, and this is where the film starts to show its teeth. There's a small heartbreaking moment early on where Spike leaves behind a toy, a Power Ranger figure. Now, in a lesser movie, this would just be a lazy shorthand for loss of innocence. You know, the camera lingers on a teddy bear in the mud, sad violin music plays, we get it. But here, it feels purposeful. The scene tells us about leaving behind the fantasy of heroism, because the world Spike is stepping into doesn't have heroes in colorful spandex. It has men like his father, Jamie. Jamie is the kind of father who thinks affection is a weakness and that trauma is just a lack of discipline. He is the ultimate survivor dad. He teaches Spike that the infected, the stragglers as they call them, are not people, they are targets. They are meat. There's a line Jamie delivers that honestly made my stomach turn. Not because it's gory, but because of what it implies about his parenting. He tells Spike, the more you kill, the easier it gets. Think about that. He isn't teaching his son how to defend himself. He is teaching him how to turn off his humanity. He is actively trying to desensitize his own child because he believes that empathy is a liability. It's the same toxic mentality we saw with Major West in 28 Days Later, just repackaged as fatherly advice. The film presents this through these bizarre, almost pagan rituals. When Spike goes to the mainland for his first kill, it's treated like a celebration. It's a blood hunt. The adults wear these grotesque masks mocking the infected, laughing in the face of the horror. It's disturbing to watch because it feels so tribal. It's a way for the community to dehumanize the enemy, to draw a hard line in the sand. We are humans, they are monsters. But the biggest problem with this worldview and the central conflict of the film's first act is that it's built entirely on lies. Spike's life is a lie. His father is not just protecting him from the truth, he's hiding from it himself. Jamie's wife, Isla, is dying of cancer. Terminal. There is no fixing it, but Jamie refuses to acknowledge it. He refuses to talk about it. He forces Spike to carry for her, to be the man of the house in the emotional sense, while Jamie goes out to play soldier in the woods. Jamie hides his wife's illness the same way he hides the humanity of the infected. If he acknowledges that his wife is dying, he has to face the grief. If he acknowledges that the infected are still human beings in pain, he has to face guilt. So he does neither. He constructs a fortress of toughness and bravado to hide the fact that he is terrified. And Spike is the one catching all the shrapnel from this emotional grenade. Spike represents the battle between two philosophies. On one shoulder, he has his father's memento mori, remember you will die, so kill first. On the other, he has an innate sense of memento amoris, remember you must love. We see this in how he treats his mother. We see this in how he hesitates when he looks at the infected. He hasn't been fully indoctrinated yet. He looks at the world and doesn't just see threats, he sees tragedy as well. His father sees a target, Spike sees a person. And this is where the film really hooked me, because usually in these movies, the loss of innocence means the kid picks up a gun and becomes a badass. We cheer for it. Yeah, get him, kid. But in 28 years later, watching Spike try to become what his father wants him to be isn't triumphant, it's tragic. It feels like I'm watching a flower trying to grow in concrete, and the concrete is actively trying to crush it. The tragedy of Spike is not a zombie apocalypse alone, it's that he's being raised by a man who thinks the only way to survive the apocalypse is to become a monster yourself. Spike is told that the outside world is nothing but death. He's told that anyone outside their island, like the mysterious Dr. Kelson mentioned in The Whispers, is insane or dangerous. He is fed a diet of fear and isolationism to keep him compliant. Does this sound familiar? It should, because this is how cults or extreme ideologies work. You terrify the next generation so they never think to look over the fence. To really understand why Spike's situation on that island is so deeply broken, we need to stop pretending this franchise was ever just about zombies. Yes, there are running infected on the posters, but if you think 28 Days Later was about watching Cillian Murphy bash heads in, you missed the point entirely. The heartbeat of this series has always been one uncomfortable question. Is staying alive worth it if you have to stop being a human to do it? That's the real conflict. Not man versus zombie, but survival versus humanity. And the franchise has never offered an easy answer. 28 Days Later is a perfect example. Jim, Selena, and the others aren't just scavenging for food, they're scavenging for meaning. That's why scenes like the horses running through the fields matter so much. Nothing explodes, no one dies, but it shows us people clinging to beauty, connection, and peace, because without those things, survival is just waiting to rot. When the film shows us the alternative, Major West and his soldiers represent pure survival stripped of empathy, West has done the math. Civilization can only restart if people become resources. Consent, dignity, love, all of it is expendable. And while the movie clearly condemns him as a monster, it also forces Jim to become something monstrous to defeat him. Shirtless in the rain, screaming, brutal, Jim survives by tapping into the same rage as the infected. The message is clear. The virus didn't create violence, it exposed it. 28 weeks later pushes this idea even further. If the first film argues that survival isn't enough, the second argues that survival at all costs destroys everything. Don abandoning his wife is one of the most hated moments in horror, but it's also horrifying because it works. He makes the smart choice, he lives, and that single act of selfish survival becomes the domino that leads to the reinfection of Britain and the collapse of a containment. A personal moral failure turns into a global catastrophe. On the institutional level, the military embodies survival on a massive scale. Code Red, snipers, firebombs, and they fail too. Their inability to see the difference between a monster and a terrified child destroys them. That's the trap this franchise keeps setting. Be too human and people die. Be too ruthless and you lose your soul. And people die anyway. This is where 28 years later places Spike. He's caught between these extremes. His father, Jamie, is the spiritual successor to Major West and Don. Tribal, isolationist, dehumanizing the infected to make violence easier. The village is safe, but culturally hollow. They survive by lying, ritualizing death, and teaching children not to look too closely. If you want to understand why 28 Years Later feels so suffocating compared to the earlier films, you first have to look where they decided to set this thing. Lindisfarne, the Holy Island. As a location scout, whoever picked this deserves a raise. It is the perfect geographical metaphor for this entire movie. It's an island that is only accessible by a causeway that gets swallowed by the ocean twice a day. It is a natural fortress, a sanctuary. But let's call it what it really is. A prison. When we meet Spike and his community, there are no group of survivors who are scrambling to rebuild civilization. We are seeing people who have actively decided to hide from it. It's impossible to miss. Time on Lindisfarne has curled up and died. In the rest of the world, or at least what we hear of it, technology has moved on. There are whispers of iPhones, of modern services, of a world that kept spinning while Britain rotted. But here it feels like we've walked onto the set of a 1950s kitchen sink drama, just with more gore. There are portraits of Queen Elizabeth on the walls. There is this rigid, suffocating patriarchal structure where the men hunt and the women wait. There is a make, do, and mend economy where Spike wears boots 3 sizes too big because that's all there is. It's not just they don't have the resources, they have just stopped wanting them. It reminds me of that feeling you get when you get into an old dusty attic. You're surrounded by nostalgic things and for a second it feels cozy and safe, but then you realize the air is stale, the roof is leaking, and you're just hiding among dead things while the real house collapses around you. That is Lindisfarne. And because they are so cut off, because they have rejected the reality of the outside world, they have had to fill that void with something else. And this is where the movie shifts to full-blown folk horror. They have replaced truth with myth. The most disturbing visual in this entire movie, and I'm including the actual gore here, are those masks. The crudely painted faces with blood weeping from the eyes. We see the adults wearing them at parties, wearing them during the blooding rituals. It's bizarre, it's grotesque, and it is entirely performative. Why would you dress up as the thing that wants to eat you? It's a coping mechanism gone wrong. It's their way of laughing in the face of extinction. If you can turn the monster into a costume, into a caricature, then you own it. You control the narrative. It's a way of saying, we aren't afraid of you, but the irony, of course, is that they are absolutely terrified. The masks are a sign of deep collective trauma that has been allowed to fester for 30 years without therapy. This brings us back to the blooding ritual, Spike's initiation. In a normal society, you become a man by getting a job or moving out or, I don't know, learning to drive. On Lindisfarne, you become a man by killing a straggler on the mainland. It is a blood rite, and this is where the us versus them mentality becomes the most dangerous weapon in the film. Jamie and the rest of the adults have built their entire society on the foundation that the infected are not human. They are monsters from the woods. They have no souls. Jamie drills this into Spike's head over and over again. Nothing bonds a group of people together faster than a common enemy. If the infected are soulless monsters, then we are the righteous heroes protecting the sanctuary. It justifies the harsh rules, rationing, and isolation. It's not hard to see the political metaphors here. And I know, we hate politics in movies, but come on. A British island's cutting itself off from the rest of the world, obsessing over a nostalgic past that never really existed, and demonizing the outsiders to keep the population scared and compliant. It's basically Brexit with zombies. It's the ultimate isolationist fantasy played out to its horrific conclusion. It also draws a massive parallel to one of Danny Boyle's other films, The Beach. Remember that community? They had paradise, they had everything, but the second someone got sick or hurt or threatened the vibe, they were hidden away. They were left to die in a tent so the rest of the group could pretend everything was perfect. That is exactly what is happening on Lindisfarne. Jamie hides his dying wife, Isla, because her sickness breaks the illusion of strength. The community hides from the reality of the infected, that they are just sick people, because acknowledging their humanity would break the illusion of their own righteousness. Spike is growing up in a world where truth is whatever keeps the fear at bay. He is being taught that the only way to be safe is to be alone, and the only way to be good is to destroy what is different. But the cracks are starting to show. You can only live in the attic for so long before you run out of air. And as Spike is about to learn, the monsters they talk about around the campfire aren't the ones screaming on the mainland. The real monsters are the ones wearing the masks, dancing in the village hall, pretending that this nightmare is a life worth living. And once Spike steps off that island and sees the world for what it really is, that carefully constructed myth is going to shatter. So, remember how I said Jamie has spent the last decade gaslighting his kid into believing the infected are just soulless husks? Monsters from a fairy tale that need to be put down like rabid dogs? Well, the movie takes about 20 minutes to take that worldview and absolutely shatter it. Once Spike steps off that island, the film forces a confrontation that completely dismantles the us versus them narrative. It looks us dead in the eye and says, the infected are not the other, they are us. In 99% of zombie media, Zombieland, etc., the zombies are dead. They are rotting meat puppets. You can smash their heads in with a cricket bat and feel absolutely zero guilt because the person who used to be there is gone. It's guilt-free violence. Video game logic, basically. But the 28 franchise has always operated on a different set of rules. These people aren't dead. They never were. They are infected with a virus that amplifies rage, sure, but their hearts are beating, their lungs are breathing, and 28 years later, the film leans into the biological reality of that harder than ever before. We are introduced to Dr. Kelson, played by Ralph Fiennes, who frankly brings a level of gravitas to this movie that it probably doesn't deserve, and he acts as the direct antithesis to Spike's father. Jamie calls them stragglers or monsters. Kelson calls them patients. He treats the infection not as a curse, but as a medical tragedy. He points out that the virus has mutated. It's no longer burning people out in a few days. It has adapted to keep the host alive for decades. We see infected who have learned to conserve energy. They aren't all sprinting marathon runners anymore. We get these slow-mo infected, emaciated, pathetic creatures crawling on the ground, eating worms just to keep their caloric intake up. There is a scene that disturbs me more than any jump scare, when an infected tries to eat the shoelaces off a boot because it's so desperate for sustenance. It's not scary, it's actually kind of heartbreaking. It forces you to look at this monster and see a starving human being, and that is dangerous for a character like Spike because you can't hate something you pity. But then the movie swings to the other extreme with the alphas. We get introduced to a brute named Samson, and yeah, giving a zombie a name is a bold choice, but stick with me. This guy is a tank. The virus has essentially acted like super steroids, a tactical predator. There is a moment where he pulls off a full Mortal Kombat fatality, ripping a head off with the spine still attached, which, okay, it was a little video gamey, but it served a purpose. It showed that these things can plan and hunt. But the moment that completely breaks or revolves the law is the birth scene. We see an infected woman in a train carriage in the middle of labor, and for a brief terrifying moment, the biological imperative to give birth overrides the rage virus. The screaming stops, the aggression pauses, and she accepts help. This scene is insane. It shouldn't work. It sounds like fan fiction garbage, but on screen, it is the ultimate refutation of Jamie's ideology. If an infected woman can still feel the instinct to protect her child, then she has a soul, period. The virus didn't erase her humanity, it just buried it under layers of anger. And we see this again with the infected child, not attacking, but sobbing over the bodies of its pack. It's feeling loss and grief. So what does this do to the story? It turns every act of violence into a bit of a moral crisis. When Jamie kills an infected, he tells himself he's destroying a machine, but Dr. Kelson looks at the same creature and sees a set of thoughts and feelings trapped in a sick body. Kelson's bone temple, this massive ossuary he's built, is a memorial. It's memento mori again, but this time it's respectful. He is acknowledging that every skull in that wall used to be a person with a name, a favorite color, and a family. This is why the film feels so uncomfortable, because it strips away the fun of the genre. It's hard to cheer for the heroes when the bad guys are just sick people who are scared and in pain. And for Spike, this is the shattering moment. He realizes that the monsters in the woods aren't the other. They are just like him, only unlucky. And if they are human, then what does that make his father, who has been slaughtering them for sport? It brings us back to the central theme. The infected might be wild animals, but there is still a spark of humanity in them. The real horror isn't that they are so different from us, it's that they are so recognizable. And once you see yourself in the eyes of the monster, you can never look at a gun the same way again. By now, it's clear that Spike's world is built on a lie, but what makes that lie truly dangerous is his father. Jamie is something far more unsettling, a man who has fully convinced himself that his own denial is strength. Everything Jamie does is a performance. When he goes out on hunts, it's about image. He comes back with stories, with confidence, with authority. He needs the community to see him as a protector, and he needs Spike to see him as a hero. The violence becomes functional and more theatrical. It reassures everyone that the story they're living inside still works. But that performance collapses the moment it's challenged. Jamie's philosophy is simple. The more you kill, the easier it gets. To him, hesitation is weakness. When Spike hesitates during his first hunt, Jamie sees failure, and his response isn't guidance or care, but anger. The moment Jamie strikes his son is the moment the illusion finally breaks. The violence was never about protection, it was about control. All the time Spike was being trained to play a role. In that instance, Spike understands something crucial. His father isn't strong, he's terrified. Terrified of grief, of loss. Terrified of a world that refuses to obey his rules, and rather than face any of that, Jamie chooses to double down on the myth. Louder stories, harsher lessons, more violence. Jamie is like an actor refusing to leave the stage as the set collapses around him, shouting his lines about heroism in hopes that volume alone will hold reality back, but Spike sees through it now. And that realization triggers Spike's true survival instincts. Not survival of the body, but survival of the self. He understands that staying means becoming exactly what his father is, hollow, angry, and trapped inside a story that no longer makes sense. This is the real conflict of 28 years later, not whether Spike can survive the infected, but whether he can survive his father's ideology. Because in this world, the most dangerous thing a child can inherit is a lie that teaches him violence is the only way to live. So Spike grabs his dying mother, drags her out of their fortress, and runs straight into a wasteland filled with rage-infected murderers. Now, if you look at this purely from a logical standpoint, this is a disastrously stupid decision. It's naive, it's reckless, it's a suicide mission. There is no cure for terminal cancer on the mainland. There is no magic pill in Dr. Kelson's office. Spike is chasing a ghost. But if you look at it through the thematic lens of the franchise, this is the most important decision anyone has made in this series since Jim decided to walk into that mansion in 28 days later, because this is a rebellion. By running away, Spike is actively rejecting the entire philosophy of Lindisfarne. He is rejecting the us versus them mentality, rejecting the safety of the attic. Most importantly, he is rejecting his father. Let's look at the two men in Isla's life for a second. Jamie, the so-called protector, the alpha of the community, is dealing with his wife's death by pretending it isn't happening. He is cheating on her. He is drinking. He is telling war stories to his buddies. He is treating her impending death as an inconvenience to his lifestyle. His denial is stagnant. It's cowardly. He wants her to die quietly in the corner so he doesn't have to feel bad about it. Spike, on the other hand, is also in denial. He thinks he can save her. He thinks if he just walks far enough, fights hard enough, and finds the mysterious Dr. Kelson, he can fix everything. It is a childish, impossible fantasy. But here is the difference. Jamie's denial leads to nothing but rot. Spike's denial leads to action. Spike's denial is productive. It forces him to pick his mother up, literally carrying the weight that his father refused to bear, and walk into hell for her. The child becomes the parent. The son becomes the father. While Jamie is back at the camp cosplaying as a soldier, Spike is out in the mud actually protecting his family. This journey is the real rite of passage. Forget the blooding ritual with the masks and the booze. That was just theater. This is the reality. Spike is learning that being a man is not about your zombie count, it's about who you are willing to die for. It brings us back to that Latin phrase the film loves to throw around, memento amoris. Remember that you must love. Dr. Kelson later frames this as the highest type of death, to go out surrounded by love rather than rage. And that is what Spike is fighting for. He might not be able to save his mother's life, but he can save her death. He can make sure she doesn't die as a secret in a dark room on Lindisfarne. He ensures she dies as a person, out in the world with someone holding her hand who actually gives a damn. Is it reckless? Yes. Is it dangerous? Absolutely, but it is a moral necessity. If Spike had stayed on that island, he would have become his father. He would have learned to harden his heart, to look away from pain, to prioritize survival over everything else. Jamie tried to turn his son into a stone, cold, unfeeling, and impenetrable, just like the walls of their fortress. And this is where the character arc really lands. When the movie started, Spike left his Power Ranger toy behind. It was a symbol of leaving childhood games. But this journey, this is the end of his innocence entirely. Now he is walking through the valley of the shadow of death, and not because he wants to be a hero, but because he loves his mum. In a franchise defined by cynicism, by military failures, and by men abandoning their families to save their own skin, seeing a character risk everything just to offer a moment of dignity to someone else feels like a revolution. Spike's plan was doomed from the start. We know that. The tragedy and the beauty is that he was the only one brave enough to try to save her, and in doing so, he finally steps out of his father's shadow and into the terrifying, painful light of the real world. If this were a standard Hollywood blockbuster, we all know exactly how this third act would play out. Spike would arrive at the mainland, he'd find Dr. Kelson. Kelson would whip up a blue vial of antivirus or a magical cancer cure in 5 minutes. There would be a big CGI boss fight with a super alpha zombie, Spike would save his mom, and they'd ride off into the sunset. That is the victory we are conditioned to expect. We expect the hero to win against death. But 28 years later doesn't care about what you expect, and it certainly doesn't care about giving you a comfortable win. Instead, it gives us something much harder to swallow, but infinitely more valuable: acceptance. When Spike finally reaches Dr. Kelson, we realize that our savior wasn't a mad scientist or villain, he's just a realist. While the people on Lindisfarne have been building walls to keep death out, Kelson has been building a temple to welcome it in. The Bone Temple is going to be the image that defines this movie for years to come. Visually, it's stunning. Thousands of bones arranged with geometric precision, but contextually, it's profound. Kelson has built a library of lives. He tells Spike that every skull in that wall was once a person, a set of thoughts, feelings, loves, and regrets. It is the ultimate equalizer. In Jamie's world, there are humans and monsters. In Kelson's temple, there are only the dead. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. And this is where the film pulls the rug out from under Spike and the audience. There is no cure for Isla. The cancer is terminal. The mission was a failure before it even started. In a lesser movie, this would be the moment of despair, but here it becomes the moment of clarity. The central conflict shifts entirely from a man versus nature to control versus acceptance. Jamie back on the island represents the desperate need for control. He lies, he fights, he creates myths, all because he cannot accept that he is powerless against death. He thinks if he doesn't name the monster, it can't hurt him. Spike started this journey with naive denial. He thought he could fix it. He thought he was the protagonist of a story where love conquers biology. But then we have Isla and Dr. Kelson. Isla uses this beautiful, haunting metaphor about the tide. She says the tide is coming in. You can't stop the tide. You can't fight the ocean with a gun or a lie. You just have to let it wash over you. And this brings us to the second Latin phrase that illustrates the film's philosophy: memento amoris. Remember that you must love. Kelson argues that this is the highest form of death. Not dying in battle, not dying in rage, but dying while being loved. And to love someone fully, you have to have the courage to let them go. This is the hardest lesson a child can learn. The movie tells us that growing up is about becoming strong enough to say goodbye, not just to shoot zombies. If the first 28 days later was about locking the door to keep the monster out, 28 years later is about what you do when the monster, death, has already walked in, sat down at your kitchen table, and poured itself a drink. You can't kick it out, you can't shoot it, all you can do is sit with it, look it in the eye, and not let it destroy who you are. The climax of this film isn't an explosion scene, but a funeral. There is a sequence at the end where Spike carries his mother's skull up to the top of the Bone Temple to place it facing the rising sun. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I was a mess. This time after a rewatch, I felt this moment so deep. Thoughts of Boyle and Garland were uncovered this time. This movie is about that universal crushing reality that we will all lose people that we love, and no amount of preparedness or survival skills can stop that. Spike places that skull, and in that moment, he stops being the soldier his father wanted him to be. He becomes something far more complex. He becomes a man who understands that the only way to beat the darkness is to acknowledge it, accept it, and then turn your face toward the sun anyway. It's a beautiful, quiet, devastating end to the journey. Or at least, it would have been the end, but because this is a franchise that refuses to sit still, the movie has one last nasty trick up its sleeve. Just when you think you've reached a place of peace, the film introduces a pattern break so jarring, so unsettling, that it makes you question everything you just watched. So right after this profound tear-jerking moment at the Bone Temple, Spike has said goodbye, the sun is rising, the emotional arc is complete, and then 28 years later decides to do something that gave me the most severe case of cinematic whiplash I think I've ever experienced. We go from a melancholic biblical folk horror about a dying mother to, well, basically a horrifying cracked out version of A Clockwork Orange meets Power Rangers. Enter Jimmy, played by Jack O'Connell. Jimmy is the character we saw briefly in the prologue as a boy, but the man we see now, a nightmare. While Spike was raised in a bubble of silence and repression, Jimmy was raised in the chaos. His mind has completely snapped. He is a grown man, but he's stuck in a perpetual violent childhood. He's wearing a tracksuit and a tiara, looking like a toddler who raided his parents' wardrobe and then decided to commit murder. His entrance is pure, unadulterated absurdity. We're talking parkour, acrobatic violence, and a punk rock cover of the Teletubbies theme song blasting in the background. It is jarring and grotesque. It turns the serious, grounded horror of the last 2 hours into a clown show where violence is treated like a video game again. But once you look past the initial "what the hell is happening" reaction, you realize this character might be actually the darkest thing in the entire franchise. It seems that Jimmy is modeled after Jimmy Savile. Savile was a TV presenter, a national treasure, a hero who did charity work, and who turned out to be one of the most prolific predatory monsters in British history. In the real world, Savile was exposed. Ideally, the monster gets caught, but in the world of 28 years later, civilization ended before the truth came out. So to this broken man-child, Jimmy Savile is still a hero. He is a saint. Jimmy wears his clothes, mimics his mannerisms, and believes he can fix it just like the TV star promised. It is a layer of cultural horror that makes my skin crawl. Jimmy is a false prophet built on the rotten foundations of pop culture. He wears an inverted cross, not because he's a Satanist, but because his father likely was a priest and he's twisted that iconography into something completely new. He quotes the book of Revelation, but he replaces Jesus with himself. Jimmy is coming. He is the Antichrist of the wasteland, a cult leader who has replaced morality with spectacle. This abrupt shift is obviously setting up the sequel, The Bone Temple, directed by Nia DaCosta. And if this ending is anything to go by, we are done with the quiet introspection. We are done with the nature of family. The next chapter is going to be about the nature of pure evil. While 28 years later was shot on iPhones to give it that intimate, experimental feel, the sequel appears to be going back to traditional cameras. If so, it's going to be cleaner, sharper, and infinitely more brutal. We're moving from the dangers of the infected to the dangers of a sociopathic cult that has completely forgotten what it means to be human. It's a terrifying prospect. We have Ralph Fiennes' Dr. Kelson, the man of science and empathy, forced into a story with this unhinged man-child warlord. It promises to be an uncomfortable collision of worldviews. If the first 90% of this movie was a heavy, beautiful funeral march, this ending is a circus act crashing through the cemetery gates, smashing the headstones and screaming at the mourners. It's the movie telling us, you thought the hard part was over because you accepted death? You thought you learned your lesson? No, you haven't seen anything yet. The infected are a tragedy. Jamie was a tragedy. But Jimmy is what happens when humanity forgets not just its technology, but its soul. He is what happens when we replace our morals with twisted fragments of old TV shows. As much as I hated the tonal shift in the moment, looking back, it might be the most brilliant thing the franchise has ever done, because it reminds us that in a world without rules, the scariest thing isn't the zombie trying to eat you, it's the guy in the tiara laughing while he watches. The entire film is a deconstruction of the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Jamie told Spike that there was a hard line between us and them, that we are the humans with souls and they are the monsters in the woods. It's a comforting lie. It makes pulling the trigger easy. It makes ignoring the dying easy. But the movie spends 2 hours showing that there are no lines. There never were. The infected in the train carriage, screaming in labor, that's us. The terrified boy sobbing over his dead family, that's us. And Jamie, the man beating his son to maintain a facade of strength, that's us too. The only real divide left in this world isn't between the living and the dead, it's between those who have the courage to accept reality, like Spike and Dr. Kelson, and those who would rather burn the world down than admit that they are scared. Growing up, whether it's a boy becoming a man or a society trying to rebuild, only begins when the myths stop working. You have to take off the mask. You have to stop playing soldier. You have to look at the monster and realize it's just a sick person who needs help, or a grieving father who has lost his way. This movie is messy. It is uncomfortable. The shift in tone at the end alienates half the audience. But in a landscape filled with algorithmic slop, 28 years later dares to be difficult. It dares to be human, and for that alone, it is worth the ticket price. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on a movie that has been living rent-free in my head for the last week. I'm genuinely curious to see where Nia DaCosta takes this with the Bone Temple, even if the idea of a Jimmy Savile-inspired warlord doing parkour scares me more than any infected ever could. Now, if you enjoyed this deep dive, or if you just want to yell at me for overanalyzing a zombie movie, make sure to hit that subscribe button, check out the other videos on the channel, drop a like, and let me know in the comments below. Do you think the infected are still human, or should Spike have just kept blasting? Thank you so much for watching, and take care.